Chapter 20. Summer Lovin' had me a blast. In late April, I attended my friend Ernie's wedding rehearsal dinner, and I thought it would just be another night out with the guys. Then something entirely unexpected happened. I fell in love. Ernie's wife, Colleen, had a bunch of girls in her bridal party, and one in particular caught my attention. Her name was Madeline. She was beautiful and exactly my type. She was a petite little Italian girl with long curly hair, as cute as could be. I noticed her first in church while we were going over what to do at the wedding. No one was really paying attention to the priest while he was talking, especially me and the two guys I was with, Steve and Tommy, from my old band playground. We had already been drinking for a few hours over at Steve's apartment before arriving at the church. Once the rehearsal dinner at the church was finished, we were all heading over to a bar restaurant called The Salty Dog. I quickly grabbed my friend Carmine to walk with me. Then I saw Madeline walking out the door. I wanted to make sure she was going over to the dinner as well. Once at The Salty Dog, I started to do what I do best. No, not play drums. Get people drunk. I was hoping that Madeline was a drinker. It was really the only shot I had because I hated small talk with girls. My way of talking to her was to order shots and then do them with her. It worked like a charm. At one point, I ordered a tray of 18 black Sambuca shots. Sambuca had always been my shot of choice, ever since my buddy Damien would steal a bottle from his parents' basement every Friday night back when we were 14 years old. Everything was going according to plan. Madeline was getting tipsy and I was already drunk. I then used my pickup line on her, which is still discussed as legendary. Just to set it up correctly, Madeline was about 5'2" and 105 pounds. So, being the ballbuster that I am, I said to her, you could be a plus-size model if you had a pretty face. Her face dropped, and then I suddenly felt a burning pain on the top of my head. The bride-to-be's mother hit me over the head with her cane after hearing what I had just said to Madeline. I think Madeline thought it was funny. Maybe. After another few hours of flirting, Madeline left. I didn't get her number or anything. I just hoped I'd see her again at the wedding. I couldn't stop thinking about her over the next few days, and I couldn't wait to see her again. I know people think I'm outgoing and extroverted, but I'm actually very shy around someone I care about. The only way I could open up, of course, was to have a few drinks. Fortunately for me, all the guys in the wedding party liked to drink as much as I did. We started drinking right after breakfast on the morning of the wedding. Once we got to the church, I got to see her again. She looked beautiful in her bridesmaid dress. Her hair was up and her face was stunning. After the ceremony, we spent an hour or so taking pictures with the entire wedding party. Madeline and I continued to flirt the whole time. Things were going great again. After the pictures, the guys and girls split up to head over to the wedding reception. Once at the reception, we all met back at the bridal suite. This was when the bride, Colleen, gave me some really bad news. I asked her where Madeline was, and she said that she had to meet her date downstairs at the cocktail hour. I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. Not to brag, but I had never chased after a girl my whole entire life. But I wasn't going to let this one get away that easy. Once Madeline came up to the bridal suite, I immediately confronted her in a very playful manner. I said, "What is this I hear? You have a date?" She knew we had been flirting the whole time, and she was very apologetic. She went on to explain that it was just some guy she had asked to the wedding. She didn't care about him being there. I told her, "If you want to get away from him at any time in the night, just give me the high sign, and we'll meet in the bridal room." I then mimicked the old Little Rascal TV show high sign they would give each other. I put my hand under my chin and wiggled my fingers in a waving motion. She said, "Okay, I got it." I had no idea if she was serious or not, but at least I had a little hope left. Right after the best man speech, I tried to catch her eye. The problem was that she was sitting on the other side of the room with all of the bride's guests. I finally caught her eye and quickly flashed her the high sign. This was it. If she didn't respond, I knew my chances of getting her were over. To my overwhelming surprise, she flashed it back at me. For two people trying to be inconspicuous, the high sign probably wasn't the best way to go about it. But I didn't care. I quickly got up and went to the bridal suite where she joined me moments later. As soon as she entered, I grabbed her and kissed her. I can still feel and taste that very first kiss we shared that night. It sounds cheesy, but it felt like it was right out of some corny movie when fireworks would go off as two people kissed. It was magical. We continued the same shenanigans throughout the night. Every 20 minutes or so, either she or I would flash the high sign and we'd meet back up in the bridal suite. After a while, her date started to get suspicious and began looking to see where she was going. I had my friend Carmine stand guard at the door just in case. I made sure that I didn't leave the wedding without getting Madeline's phone number so I could ask her to come to my Hamptons house, which started very soon. A few days after the wedding, I scheduled a meeting with all of the people involved in the Hamptons house. I told them that we needed to go over the bills and the general rules for guests. It was really all a sham. I just wanted to see Madeline again, but was too shy to ask her out on a one-on-one date. I figured if I could see her again with everyone around, it would be more comfortable. Once she was there, it felt just like the wedding again. No awkward date conversation, no weird silences. It was like I'd known her my whole life. I'd never felt like this before. It just felt right. I also used this opportunity to invite her to come to the house whenever she wanted. She said that she'd love to come, and I became excited and nervous all at the same time. This would start one of my favorite summers of all time. The summer of 2003 consisted of me spending every weekend with Madeline and all of my friends in the Hamptons. Then, during the week, I started writing new material with ZO2. The band only had access to the shared rehearsal room on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Paulie, Dave, and our producer Bob decided that we needed to make a full-length professional-sounding CD with all of the bells and whistles, an idea I was completely against for many reasons. I didn't see the need for a full-length CD. What would that do for us? If the idea was to get picked up by a record label, then all we would need is a demo. Lastly, it was going to cost a small fortune to make the record. I found out Bob was asking for $10,000 to produce it. I couldn't believe it. I told the guys there's no way we should be paying Bob all that money and spending thousands more to make a CD. I was financially responsible for my mom at this point, and there was no way I could afford such a thing. Nor did I want to. Paulie and Dave said they would front the money, all to be paid for on credit cards. I could pay them back at a later date. I still voiced my vote against doing it, but because I didn't have to come up with the money right away, and because ultimately I was outvoted, which would become a regular occurrence, I went along with the plan to record a full-length CD. We would start writing extensively every Tuesday and Thursday from 8 p.m. until the wee hours of the morning during the summer of 2003. Before recording the full-length album, we decided to demo out all of the songs. One of the first demos we did was for the song Breakdown. This is the original version with Dave singing lead. It was the perfect mix of fun and work. All week I would be rehearsing with ZO2 and writing for the album. Then I spent every weekend partying with all of my friends and falling more in love with Madeline. In fact, towards the end of the summer, Madeline and I were officially in love, and ZO2 had the right songs for the album. Things were starting to come together. Right in the middle of all of this, Paulie and Dave informed me that they had been approached by another band called Seven Wiser to play a showcase for a big record label. I told them, of course you should do it. I was genuinely excited for them. I thought this was a huge opportunity for them. I'd been working my whole life to play in front of a record label. I didn't think they should pass it up. A few days later at ZO2 rehearsal, Paulie and Dave informed me that the showcase went great and the band got signed to Wind Up Records. I was so happy for them. What amazing news. But they didn't seem that happy. They said that they were still undecided about whether to play with Seven Wiser or to continue with ZO2. Paulie was especially skeptical because he would only be playing guitar in Seven Wiser and not singing. Basically, neither was sure if he wanted to be backup musicians for someone else's band or do his own thing. I personally thought they were crazy. They had a band signed to Wind Up Records that wanted them. Wind Up was very popular at this time. They had the massively successful Creed as clients and just recently released Evanescence's first CD. They were slowly becoming the it label. I told them both, why not go play with Seven Wiser and see how it goes? Worst case, you can use that to further ZO2. I thought it was very sound reasoning and advice. They said they'd have to think it over and would decide over the next few weeks. About 2 weeks later, Paulie and Dave said they got a call from the manager of the band that was signed to Wind Up. He had been to a ZO2 show while scouting Paulie and Dave and mentioned that he also really loved my drumming. It turned out that they were now potentially looking for a new drummer and wanted to know if I would be interested in coming down to audition. Of course, I immediately said yes, which I think took them by surprise. I never pretended or misled any band I've ever been in. My ultimate goal was always first, and my friendship and loyalty to any particular band was always second. I'm not sure why they were so surprised that I was interested in auditioning for a band that was just signed to a major label. Hadn't I just given them that exact advice only a few weeks prior? I received the Seven Wiser demo a few days later and began learning the songs. I actually really liked the material. It sounded contemporary and in line with what was happening in the rock music world in 2003. It was definitely radio friendly. I went to the audition in early August 2003. Paulie and Dave were also there because they still hadn't decided exactly what they were going to do. I met the singer John Santos, guitarist Joe Bell, and their manager-producer Sandy Thomas. All of them seemed nice upon my first meeting, and the audition went perfectly. Not only did I know all of the material, but I had been playing with Dave on bass for over a year now, and it was pretty easy to lock in with him. I got a call the next day inviting me to lunch. I wasn't nervous for the meeting, but I definitely knew that this could possibly be the moment I'd worked my whole life for. A shot at being in a band on a major label. All the years of shopping for a record deal could possibly be coming to an end. I met with Sandy and John at Figaro Cafe in the Village. That was my go-to spot. It's even where I scheduled the semi-fake Hamptons house meeting so I could see Madeline again. I thought returning might bring me some good luck. Sandy started off by saying that not only did he love my playing, but he really loved the chemistry that Paulie, Dave, and I had together. He then offered me the job on the spot. I didn't want to show my excitement, so I calmly said, if the offer was contractually good, I would definitely be interested. They were offering me more of a hired gun position and not the role of a full-time band member. I assumed it was the same sort of deal they were offering Paulie and Dave. I was totally okay with it as long as the guaranteed money was good. I also assumed that's why Paulie and Dave weren't as quick to accept the offer. Sandy said that he could have the contract drafted for me within a few days. I still didn't want to celebrate, but I was very happy and excited. I thought to myself, this was the break I'd been waiting for. Seven Wiser was, John Santos vocals, Joe Bell lead guitar, Paulie Z rhythm guitar, Dave Z bass, and now Joey Cassata on drums. That same night, I went to ZO2 rehearsal and told the guys that Seven Wiser had officially offered me the gig. I thought they would be happy, but instead they told me that they had decided earlier that day not to take the Seven Wiser gig. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them I thought they were making a huge mistake and explained it could only benefit us and not hurt ZO2. I explained if Seven Wiser becomes gigantic, then it was great for all of us. We would then have money and some industry clout if we ever wanted to launch ZO2. Worst case scenario, Seven Wiser bombed, and then we could just pick up ZO2 where we left off. They wouldn't even listen to my suggestion or advice. They both had Bob in their ears telling them that it was a big mistake to go with Seven Wiser. I'm 100% positive that Bob was doing this strictly out of selfish financial reasons. Paulie and Dave listened to everything Bob said like he was God. It would be a battle between us for many years to come. I think they believed that if they didn't take the offer from Seven Wiser, then surely I would also turn it down. They couldn't have been more wrong. They were absolutely crushed when I told them I was still accepting the offer that was on the table. Not only crushed, but shocked that I would do that. I told them I would still record the album and do any shows we had booked as long as it didn't conflict with Seven Wiser. At one point, Paulie even said, "We should have never even told you they were interested in you as a drummer. None of this would be happening." That was the difference between us. I was genuinely excited and happy for both of them when they told me about Seven Wiser. In complete contrast, they were actually upset with me for wanting to do it. I think Paulie and Dave thought they had something to prove. Even though they weren't much younger than I was, ZO2 was going to be their first real original band. Yes, they had been in other bands, and Dave was even with TSO, but ZO2 was something that they had decided that they were going to start from the ground up and build into something. I had already been through starting a band from ground zero a dozen times before. I'd also been through the countless number of shitty gigs and years of chasing that illustrious record deal. Paulie actually said to me that he didn't want a record contract yet. He said he wanted to go through the years of struggle because he felt like he had to pay his dues. I had already paid my dues 1,000 times over and was ready for the record contract and to fulfill my dreams to finally start making money as a professional drummer. We used to argue this point all the time. Us being huge Kiss fans, Paulie would try to argue that Kiss and bands like Kiss had really paid their dues before making it. That's what he wanted, and he thought we should want the same. My response was always like this. Bands like Kiss did pay their dues, to a certain extent, but nothing compared to what guys like me went through. When Kiss released their first record, Paul Stanley was only 22 years old. I'm sure he paid some dues by playing in bands for a few years, but I had started gigging at the age of 14. I was now approaching 30 and was still grinding every day, trying to make it in the music business. That's 16 years of dues. 99.9% of people would have long given up on their dream after a few years, but not me. That's why it's always so comical to me when I read books by mega rock stars and they all preach about paying their dues. They were all rich and famous before they were 25 years old. How many dues did they really pay? Let's see any one of them struggle for 15 years while working as many jobs as possible and helping to support their families. That's paying dues. I'd paid enough dues for 5 lifetimes. I was ready for success. Over the next few weeks, while I was negotiating my contract with Seven Wiser, ZO2 was beginning pre-production on the debut album. Most of the songs were ready to be recorded, and we were scheduled to go into the recording studio to begin tracking in October of 2003. I'd also just scheduled tracking for the Seven Wiser debut album for Wind Up Records. In fact, I recorded the Seven Wiser record only a few days before recording the ZO2 record. It was all becoming a very strange situation. Seven Wiser would track their album at Pi Studios in Long Island. I was to be paid a nice amount for the tracks, and it felt really good to finally be part of a professional operation. That was until I got into the recording studio. I recorded my tracks on an old 60s Black Oyster Ludwig kit. It was beautiful, just like Ringo's from the Beatles. The first problem I noticed was when we started to get drum sounds. Getting drum sounds is a very tricky thing. So much goes into it, from the size of the room to the placement of the mics on the drums to the placement of the mics in the room. It is a long, tedious process, but a process with which I was very familiar with. That's why, when we started to get sounds for the Seven Wiser album, the approach of the producer surprised me. About 10 minutes into getting sounds, the producer in my talkback mic said, "Okay, we got it." I assumed by that he meant, okay, we have signals, and now we could start to get sounds. But he meant that he was happy with the sounds he was hearing. I thought to myself, impossible. I then asked if I could come in and hear the sounds that he got. I knew the Ludwig kit was a fantastic kit, but there was no way he could have gotten sounds in 10 minutes. Sure enough, when I entered the control room, the drums sounded like tin cans. The producer must have seen my face because he immediately got defensive and said, "Don't worry, we're going to use a lot of plugins and triggers to beef up the sound in post-production." I knew this was the wrong approach and a disaster waiting to happen. It was okay to use those things in post-production, but it's imperative to start with a killer drum sound as a base to work off of. I had to go along with it because I was just a hired gun, and the record label was paying for studio time and they wanted to start tracking. Tracking went smoothly, albeit a little stale and lifeless. I was going to be tracking to Seven Wiser's old demo. They were undecided about whether to re-record some of the other tracks, like bass, guitar, and vocals. So I basically played along to their old demo with my new drum parts. It was a lifeless session. All of my songs were done in 1 or 2 takes. As soon as my tracks were done, my job was over. Again, this was something I wasn't used to. I can say this at least. The years with Valentine Smith did prepare me for my first major record label experience. It wasn't the exciting experience of recording my first major label album that I thought it was going to be. Just a few days later, I began recording ZO2's album at Unique Studios in New York City. From the start, the process was exactly the opposite of the Seven Wiser experience. Paulie and Dave had never really done a big recording for their own band in a major recording studio, so they were excited and extremely energized. What ZO2 was lacking in pure hit songwriting, it made up for tenfold with sheer energy and vibe. Getting drum sounds for this record was once again night and day different than the Seven Wiser recording just a few days earlier. We spent hours making sure that the drums were perfect so they could be used to anchor the rest of the album. And it was damn near perfect. Once tracking began, we did it more old school style, not the lifeless way I had recorded the Seven Wiser album. We attempted to track all the rhythmic instruments at the same time. Even though we were assuming we'd only keep the drum tracks, it was my favorite way to record. In essence, it was the three of us playing live. Paulie was in the control room tracking guitars, Dave was in an isolated booth tracking bass, and I was in the massive main room tracking drums. The very first song we tracked was Radio.
watching, not a word. They just fall. I took my broken heart and made a record that hits the charts. Now did you know? Now I'm the one she loves, but now I just turn the volume up. Can't let go. She's in love with the radio. Now I know. She's turned on to another show. She's in love with the Can't let go. She's in love with the radio. Don't you know? She's turned on to another show. Now I know. She's in love with the radio. Don't you know? She's turned on to another show. She's in love with the radio. She's in love with the radio. She's in love with the radio. She's in love.
Everything was going super smooth until we got to the song Taking Me Down. This was one of the songs from their old demo, and I never particularly liked the drum pattern that the old drummer was doing. Ever since ZO2 started gigging, I had changed the drum pattern to more of what I would play and write. This apparently went unnoticed by Paulie, Dave, and Bob, but when we began tracking, Dave immediately stopped and said, "That's not the drum pattern from the demo." I replied, "Yeah, I changed that months ago." This comment caused a bit of a frenzy. I went into the control room where I was confronted by Paulie, Dave, and Bob. They explained that when writing that original demo, they had worked hard to come up with that drum pattern. Bob went so far as to say that every single kick drum was carefully thought out. I politely explained that they weren't drummers and really didn't know how to write a good drum pattern, and that pattern was very spacious and not groovy. They of course liked it because it sounded complicated and slightly offbeat. They were strangely attached to this ridiculous drum pattern. It was already the end of the night, so I told them that I'd learn the pattern and do it tomorrow. I came in the next morning with a slightly modified version of their pattern. I purposely kept in a few of the offbeats that I knew they were weirdly attached to. Since tracking Taking Me Down that day, I have never played that pattern again, and no one ever noticed. I thought to myself, I'm dealing with real nut jobs. Once my tracking was completed, I still came to the studio every day to be part of all the other tracking and mixing. Hearing that ZO2 album come together was the first time I started to really get excited about ZO2. There was a raw energy vibe that we really captured. On one of the last days of tracking background vocals, Bob told us that he had a little surprise for us. A few minutes later, legendary rock singer Lynn Turner walked through the door. Joe was famous for his days in Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow and singing with Yngwie Malmsteen. At first, we thought he was just there to say hello, but Bob informed us that he was going to be laying down some background vocals to our song, Dirty Water.
She dreams in red, the beads of sweat remind her a guilty bed contours the shape of
Up until this point, I thought Bob was just a name dropper and someone that liked to exaggerate about all the people he worked with. Actually, I still thought he was that person, but at least bringing in Joe Lynn gave him some validity. Joe Lynn's vocals definitely made the choruses much fatter and warmer, but having him on the album was more to give ZO2 a bit of street cred. I knew in the grand scheme of things, having Joe Lynn sing some background vocals on our album meant nothing. But to the outside world and to everyday people, when I mentioned we had Joe Lynn Turner from Rainbow singing on the album, they immediately took us seriously. It was just the way of the world. Perception is reality. This was a weird time period. As ZO2 was getting more and more excited about the album and talk of the future, in the back of everyone's mind, especially mine, we knew that I was also a member of Seven Wiser. Both albums wound up being mixed, mastered, and finished at the same time. The quality wasn't even close. The ZO2 album sounded warm and powerful, while the Seven Wiser album sounded tinny and thin. Bob did an outstanding job producing along with Gary Toll as the engineer. But there were still two very big things in Seven Wiser's favor that I just couldn't overlook. They were signed to a major label, and their songs were all radio friendly. I was at another crossroads in my career. Luckily, I wouldn't have to make that decision anytime soon. After both albums were finished, it was time for Dave to leave on tour with TSO again. This gave me a few months of straight Seven Wiser rehearsals without having to somehow split my time with ZO2. My contract hadn't been fully ironed out yet with Seven Wiser, and the next few months were very stressful trying to get it done. Joe Bell, Seven Wiser's guitarist, introduced me to a lawyer named Gary Edelman, who would be negotiating our contracts for us. In November 2003, Seven Wiser also hired 2 new members to replace Paulie and Dave. Negotiating my contract was difficult. Seven Wiser's manager/producer, Sandy Thomas, was a real jerk-off. He was the type of guy that would yes you to your face and then do something completely different behind your back. It was important for me to get the right deal because I was becoming more and more financially responsible for my mom. About 6 months prior, she had a collapsed lung and was officially diagnosed with emphysema. She wasn't doing well at all, and I knew this was my shot to not only take care of her, but to possibly get her out of that stupid little apartment in the city and maybe buy her a house back in Brooklyn. It was all I wanted now. I didn't care about being a rock star anymore. It was more about being able to take care of my mom, the one person who had taken care of me all of my life. I knew the only way I would be able to do that was through my drums. Paulie, Dave, and Bob never understood that I needed that financial stability for my mom. Once Dave came back from TSO, and if I had the right contract negotiated, my mind was made up. I would leave ZO2 and stay with Seven Wiser. Madeline was a paralegal at a law firm in Manhattan, and she was a real whiz with contracts and wording. Even though I had a lawyer, Madeline was the one to constantly make changes and negotiate my contract for me. Gary was always surprised at all the intelligent things Madeline asked for and put into the contract. Finally, after about 2 months of negotiations and dozens of hours on the phone with Sandy, the contract was finished and signed. There was one major clause that I wanted in. I wanted a way to be able to terminate my contract at any point. I remained skeptical about Sandy's intentions after the 2 months of negotiations. I started to have a funny feeling in my gut that he was up to no good. I insisted on the clause, and they obliged. Once Dave returned from the TSO tour, ZO2 began playing a residency at Arlene's Grocery in Manhattan every Monday night. It was perfect. Seven Wiser was still in extensive rehearsals for a possible upcoming tour that the record label was putting together, and Monday nights playing with ZO2 wouldn't interfere at all, or so I thought. While Dave was away on tour, Paulie began to launch the official ZO2 website, zo2.com. It was filled with live pictures of the band performing, along with pictures from our recent photo shoot with legendary rock photographer Mark Weiss. Mark was mostly known for photographing all the biggest rock acts of the 80s, including Twisted Sister, Motley Crue, Van Halen, Metallica, and even Kiss. Dave had known Mark through TSO, and Mark agreed to do the photo shoot with us. This was a big opportunity that we couldn't pass up. I have to hand it to Paulie, the website looked fantastic. The problem was that it was a little too fantastic for Seven Wiser's manager, Sandy. Sandy was still bitter that Paulie and Dave chose to do their own thing instead of joining him and Seven Wiser. It started to become this crazy competition between them. Once Sandy saw the amazing-looking ZO2 website with all of the stunning photos that Mark had taken, along with the live shots, he basically lost his mind. He had to do something to slow ZO2 down now because Seven Wiser was moving at a snail's pace. I didn't know it at the time, but the reason why they were moving so slowly was because of Sandy. It turned out that he was torturing Wind Up Records with every little detail. The night that Sandy saw the ZO2 website, he had his assistant/lackey Andrew call me and demand that ZO2 take down all the pictures and references of me being in the band. I actually laughed at first because I thought he was kidding. He wasn't. I demanded to talk to Sandy directly. All of a sudden, Sandy chimed in. The weasel had been listening in on mine and Andrew's conversation the whole time. He began screaming like a lunatic over the phone, to the point where if he had been in front of me, I would have probably knocked him out. His demands were absolutely outrageous. Not only did he want me to take down any picture that included me from the ZO2 website, he wanted me to stop playing with them altogether, and he demanded that I didn't play live in public with them anymore. I tried to keep my cool as much as I could, and I responded by saying, "You have no right to take away my source of income if you and Seven Wiser aren't paying me yet. Seven Wiser's pay didn't start until the tour officially began. Once it did, they would pay me while I was out on the road, and then a retainer while I was off." I told him, at that point, he had the right to tell me to not play with ZO2 if and only if it interfered with Seven Wiser's schedule. My calm demeanor sent him into more of a frenzy, but he knew I was right. Still, Sandy wouldn't back down easily. He had to get something out of me and to do something to hurt ZO2. So he approved of me playing for now, but still demanded I take the pictures down. He said that if Wind Up saw that the drummer for their new band, Seven Wiser, was in a big photo shoot with the famous rock photographer Mark Weiss as an obvious band member of another band, that they would flip out. I knew it was all bullshit, and he was just on a power trip, but I decided to placate him and agreed that I would get Paulie to remove the photos. I refused, though, to take down the live shots. Sandy agreed. The next day, I had to call Paulie to tell him the news. He was crushed. His worst fears were beginning to come true. He knew that eventually the time was going to come that I had to go to Seven Wiser full time, but I guess he was just in denial. Before Paulie agreed to remove the photos, he, Dave, and Bob wanted to talk to me. I had assumed that they were going to give me an ultimatum and that I had to choose Seven Wiser or ZO2. I couldn't fault them for this. It was obnoxious of me to ask them to remove the photos from the website. Even though Sandy was just being an asshole, I couldn't jeopardize my record contract and my financial future for myself and my mom just to avoid hurting Paulie's and Dave's feelings. I was fully prepared to make the choice that night, and it wasn't going to be what the guys in ZO2 wanted. When I got to the studio, Bob began by saying how valuable he thought I was to ZO2 and that he didn't want to lose me. I kept waiting for the but it never came. Bob then asked for permission for him to call Sandy directly and talk to him about the situation before removing any of the photos. I told Bob, "I think you're wasting your time. Sandy's a jerk-off and he's on some kind of power trip. There's no way to change his mind." Bob still suggested that he give it a shot. We actually decided to call Sandy on the spot. I heard the whole conversation. Bob basically tried to reason with Sandy. He said, "Listen, Joey's a great drummer. We could both use him. There's no conflict. If he's under contract with you, then you get first priority. But if you aren't using him, let us use him for gigs and some label showcases." Sandy wasn't having any part of it. He began screaming on the other end. "Who do you think you are? You cannot use my drummer that's under contract with me and Wind Up Records for showcases with other labels. I will be a laughingstock if I allowed that to happen." Bob kept his cool and tried to reason with Sandy, but Sandy was like a rabid animal. I gained a lot of respect for Bob that night. He fought for me and tried to keep me as a member of ZO2. I never forgot it. Unfortunately, Bob's idea didn't work. I was again expecting the ultimatum, but it never came. I went straight to Paulie's house and sat with him as he reluctantly agreed to take the Mark Weiss photos down from the website. He was clearly very upset. After I left Paulie's house, I decided I wasn't going to let Sandy get away with anything else. I just knew more was to come. He was on a power trip that wouldn't end until ZO2 was no more. If I was having this much trouble now, what would happen when it was time to actually get paid? Dealing with Sandy was one of the worst experiences I ever went through in my entire musical career. Sure enough, the morning after I made Paulie remove all of the agreed-upon photos, I got a voicemail from Sandy's lackey, Andrew. It said I was in violation of my contract and that all photos and any mention of me had to be removed from ZO2's website and advertising. I was in shock. I'm not sure why, because I knew more was coming, but I never thought it would be the next morning and the complete contradiction of the agreement Sandy and I had just made. I called Sandy back in a rage. Of course, Andrew picked up and I began to scream at him. "This is ridiculous. I did exactly what Sandy wanted, and now he wants more. What the F is his problem?" I screamed. Once again, it turned out that the coward was actually secretly listening in on our conversation and then decided to chime in. He also began to shout, "I can't be made a fool of. I don't want that fat asshole Bob Held calling me and telling me what I should be doing." Then he started to make demands. "You get those photos down within the hour or you're fired." I was fuming. I wished he was in front of me. We would have brawled right then and there. I fired back with just one comment. "Go fuck yourself!" And I hung up the phone. So, depending on how you look at it, either I quit Seven Wiser when I told Sandy to go fuck himself, or he fired me because I didn't do what he wanted. Either way, later that day, I received a letter saying that our contract was now null and void. So much for my big record contract deal. What a joke. I went straight to the Seven Wiser studio in Williamsburg, Brooklyn to pick up my gear. I brought it to the ZO2 rehearsal room, and on the way, I called Dave and Paulie to tell them the good/bad news about what had just transpired. I was back in ZO2 full time. As disappointed as I was about the whole Seven Wiser situation, I also had a strange sense of relief once it was over. I wanted to have that record contract so badly that I compromised a lot of who I am. A younger version of myself would have knocked that prick Sandy out months ago. I should have never let him treat me like that or talk to me the way he did. He was hanging that golden carrot in front of my face, and I just couldn't stop chasing it. There's an amazing lyric by the Australian band The Kin that goes, "You're looking for gold when sitting on diamonds." Maybe I had my diamonds right underneath me the whole time in ZO2. I had just turned 30 years old, and I knew ZO2 was going to be one of my last big pushes to finally make my dreams come true. I planned on going at it 1,000%.